So, so in the song "You Can Never Ask Too Much of Love," so now that you worked with David a bit one-on-one,
Yeah.
so I was gonna ask first, what was it like having him as a producer?
It was a learning experience. I mean, he's one of the best in the business. I mean, he's discovered some of the biggest talent out there, like Celine Dion, and so I was really interested in finding out what I could learn from him. First as a songwriter, and then any recording techniques that he brought to the table. And it was he delivered on both ends, man. I learned a lot on both of those two fronts.
So what was an interesting technique? Do you remember?
Two things when it comes to recording techniques. At the time, this was like mid-1990s, so technology was a lot different. And I remember he used a programmer to do a lot, to get a lot of the sounds that he recorded. And I think the only thing that was really live was the guitar on that. Everything else was programmed. One of the things that jumped out at me that I loved that he did and that I copied immediately was how he would take a sample of an alto flute and have it low in the mix, playing along, say, with another instrument or with the melody, and it just added such warmth to the track. It was like it was a presence, and you may not, unless you were looking for it, notice that it was there, but its effect on the track just fattened the overall sound. Because the alto flute is a very, very warm kind of a woodwind instrument. That was one thing. The other thing that he did that I learned from him and that I copied, I don't do a lot of programming anymore, but that I did a lot at that time that I got from him was whenever he would have a high string line in the track, he would always double it an octave lower, but have the octave really low. And it made the high string line that you heard sound richer and fuller as well. But that he would always double it at the octave and have the lower octave very soft. And it really made synth strings sound fatter and more real when he did that.
Wow, and so the strings on that song were synth?
Yeah.
Wow.
They were. Yeah. So that's in the programming. The other thing that he did that was really interesting was the amount of detail, how comprehensive he was in recording the lead vocal. He would record track after track after track after track of the lead vocal. And then he had this real, you could tell, man, that it was like second nature to him, the way he would then comp the lead vocal. Sometimes, man, going in and just grabbing one word from one track, boom, and pop, and he would try various combinations from all of these tracks that he had created to create this composite. And then eventually it would come up with maybe 2 or 3 composites and then decide which one of those was the best. And even then, sometimes he would go back in sometimes, maybe, because this one note right here is just a little flat, This was before the days of auto-tune. But I remember that stuck out. That sticks out in my mind as something that he spent a lot of attention just creating the lead vocal track. He spent a lot of time on that.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed a lot about his work with other people too, is he's very focused in on the lead vocal and getting 30, 40 takes on one line.
Yeah.
And was it always full song, or did he like do punch-ins as well, or?
One of the things that made him a great producer was he would go with the strength of the singer. Some singers, man, have to sing it top to bottom.
Mhm.
They, it's about pacing for them. They can't just punch in and do a line.
Yeah.
Others are really great at that.
Mhm.
And so he would go with the, how whatever the singer felt most comfortable doing. But he would get a lot of takes either way
Mhm.
out
Yeah.
of the singer. If he needed to take a break and come back even another day and do more takes, that's what he would do. To get what he needed.
That's awesome. That's a strategy I've had to do before. And was this all this was in the Pro Tools days? Was it Pro Tools was
This was
around, or?
before Pro Tools. I mean, I remember the programmer was using. Remember the MPC 60 or the MPC 300 or something like that?
Yeah, 3000. I think.
3000. They were still using those kinds of things with the
Mhm.
floppy disk with
Oh,
all the
yeah.
samples. We were still using that stuff, man, back in the mid 90s, man. DAWs, man, weren't really out yet. I mean, they weren't a thing yet.
Wow. So that's just a whole different era of comping.
I'm sure he's moved into the 21st century now.
Yeah, but
remember,
at that time.
that's what, 30 years ago?
Wow. It's really been that long already.
Let's see, we're talking 94-ish. So
29.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a long time ago, man. And there's been a lot of advances in technology.
Yeah, definitely.
I have to admit, I haven't really kept up. That's on my bucket list, man, to go to just update my whole studio, man, so that I can actually do some current sounding demos.
You still have tape stuff too, or is it?
I have, yeah, man, I have stuff on a lot of different mediums, but
Oh, yeah.
man, yeah, man, I remember having a rack this time with all of the different modules and
Mhm.
stuff before everything was like a plug-in in a computer.
Oh yeah.
I still have this huge rack sitting in my garage, man, that I never use anymore, full of outboard gear and nitty stuff.
Yeah, some of the outboard gear stuff is still pretty relevant. People still swear by them, but
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true. That's true.
But the plugins sound different too. So,
Mhm.
but yeah. So then another question I had was, how did David Foster and Take Six meet?
Through our manager, our personal artist management. Our manager at that time had already been David Foster's manager for quite a while, and so when he came on board, he encouraged collaborations. So that song is not the only song that we did with him. We recorded a couple of songs for a Kenny Rogers album that David Foster was producing. Again, that was encouraged by our manager who represented both of us.
That's neat. Yeah, I couldn't find anything about that online, but
Yeah.
yeah, I might have had to do a little more digging. But
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
awesome. I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you just maybe Google Kenny Rogers and Take Six,
Yeah, that might pop.
it'll pop up, or do a search on YouTube. I think it'll pop up.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll look into that too. So then you said something about the songwriting process. You learned some things. How was writing with David? Like on the songwriting side, was it more like, was he on, like, were y'all splitting up the lyric duty, or like was he more over one thing, you over the other?
Now here's the interesting thing that I learned about David Foster that I didn't know going in to do a co-write with him. He said two things right off the bat that I was like, really? And then when I listened back to a lot of his classic stuff, I'm like, oh yeah. Looked at credits, oh yeah, he's right. The two things are this. First thing he said was, I don't do up-tempo stuff, man. I write ballads. That's what I do. Because when we met to co-write, I brought some ideas, a couple of ideas. And one was a real up-tempo R&B thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one was it was R&B too, but it was a ballad.
Mm-hmm.
He really gravitated towards the ballad, and he was like, that's not my field. that up-tempo stuff, man, that's just not my thing. And we actually used it on another project, the ballad. We actually used it on a different project that he did, and it was a release, I think, only in Japan, that we did. I think it's called "Someone to Love" or something like that. We didn't use it on our record, but because he wanted to start fresh, just write a whole new tune for our record. That was the first thing that was an aha moment for me. Oh man, that is his thing. He's a ballad king.
Yeah.
The second thing that I learned was he said he's not a lyricist. He always worked with or collaborated with someone who was a lyricist. And so I believe the song that we did on for Take Six, his wife at the time,
Yeah,
Linda
Yeah.
wrote the lyric actually for that song.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, "Yeah, man, I'm a producer and I write melodies and and can arrange them just right, but I'm not really a lyricist." So those are the two things I learned about from him, and so we just sort of sat at a keyboard, because I'm a keyboardist, he's a keyboardist, and just kind of started playing ideas. And every now and then he would say, "Oh, I like that. Let's see where that goes," And then he would sit down, take what I maybe a germ of something I played, and he would flesh it out a little bit more. And the one thing, this just came back to me. One thing I remember that was interesting about writing. Every now and then, we would agree on a melody, but we wouldn't agree on the exact harmonies for it. And I remember him one time saying, "I don't like that chord." And I went, "Man, I love that chord, man. It's more gospel." And he was like, "Yeah, that's why I don't want that. I don't want that in there. It's too jazzy. It needs to be more pop." And he would very oftentimes take some of my harmonies and thin them out. And in the end, when I listened back to it, I'm like, yeah, he was right. It would have taken the song in a different direction. He really wanted it to have more mass appeal, more crossover appeal in terms of it being a pop ballad as opposed to having more of an R&B or a gospel, black gospel flavor to it. Which is not to say he didn't like those kinds of things. He just knew where they would fit best.
Yeah.
And he would say, "Here it's okay. Over here, no, not so much." That was also a learning experience in terms of staying focused on the style when writing with David.
That's really good. That's really cool.
Yeah, man, he was. That's why he's David Foster.
Yeah.
He had great instincts for what works and what doesn't work for a particular style. And if you're talking about a pop ballad, he was the king of that. I was there to just soak it up. And so if he told me, "No, we're not going in that direction," I was like, "Okay, where are we going? I'm taking notes."
Man. Then the other question I had was about the location, like the studio location y'all recorded, and kind of how the vocals were recorded as well.
So he had his own studio, in his house, where it was kind of like where we did, where we would do most of the songwriting. As I recall, when we were in the studio, we would go to another another studio, you know, that was, you know, and I can't remember exactly where we recorded now. But I remember doing the songwriting in his home studio, but then we'd go to a separate studio, that had a lot more, you know, had a full board, you know, 48 tracks and stuff to work, you know, all that kind of stuff. And if you start asking me about that stuff, that's not my thing, man. I can't even remember what kind of board it was, especially after all these years. But I remember being in the studio. The track was done first, of course, and then we would come in and do the vocals. Now, and he was really cool with working with the way Take Six is used to recording our vocals, and we would do it basically in 3 stages. We would record all of the upper background vocals first. When I say upper, I mean all the background vocals except for the bass, particularly if it was a cappella. For the song that we did with him on our track, on our record, that was it, You Can Never Ask. What's the name of the track? I think it's
yeah, You Can Never Ask Too Much of Love.
You Can Never Ask Too Much of Love. There's another song we recorded with a similar name. I get confused with. Because there wasn't a lot of you know, because it was with a track, the bass singer didn't have a lot that he was doing separate from us. When we do a cappella stuff, if you listen to any of Take Six's a cappella stuff, the bass singer is really like an instrumentalist. You know, he might be walking like in a jazz type upright bass way, and it's so. What he's doing is rhythmically so different from what we're doing that we always record him separate from us. But because we were recording to an instrumental track, a lot of what he did was you know, rhythmically in sync with what we were doing. So I think for that song, our bass singer Vinny sang along with us, and then we would do the lead vocal separate on top of that. And we already talked about his meticulous approach to recording lead vocals. I mean, he would spend a lot of time recording the lead vocal, and then a ton of time in the way that he comped that lead once it was done, and then mixing it. Of course, would be the last step. That's what I remember about how we recorded that song.
Okay. So when y'all were recording like the backgrounds, and there's more than like 1 or 2 people in there, were y'all all on the same microphone, or was it separate microphones as well?
We all record on separate mics. We kind of stand in a half circle.
Yeah.
And record on. Everybody is recording on separate mics, going to an individual track, their own track. And we generally would double every part that we sang, so that when you mix it, you can create a stereo mix of each voice part. So, for instance, because there's 6 of us, we'd have at least 12 tracks, 2 tracks for each vocal part, and then 20 tracks for the lead vocal. But yeah, that's how we always record with whether it's a cappella or with instrumentation. What that does, interestingly, is you get some room. You get a little bit of the other voices sort of bleeding onto your track, and that actually makes the sound a little fatter. What happens is that, though, if anyone makes a glaring mistake, that is bleeding onto someone else's track, that everybody has to repeat that section. We always record, though, a phrase at a time anyway. We never record straight down. We really craft each phrase, make sure that both tracks where everybody's voice is right, in tune, in sync, and then move on to the next phrase. That's generally how we record. But if everybody, if someone felt like they nailed theirs, they could stop singing and everybody else could keep recording. But if you make them, if they felt like they nailed their part, but someone else said, yeah man, but I made a huge mistake and it's probably going to be bleed on your track, then they'd have to record theirs again along with everybody else as well. But in most cases, man, as we're working phrase by phrase, everybody is finishing feeling good about their part at different times. And so, you know, and every now and then, man, you hit that golden moment where everybody nailed it the first time and everybody looks around and goes, keep that, let's move on. But to be honest with you, that was a rarity. That comes from being perfectionists.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the songs were 6 people singing, and it's like everybody has to be exactly perfect.
Yeah. I think, you know, there were times, man, where we worked with producers who would say, I don't want it to be as pristine as you guys normally like it. I need it to be just a little, it can be just a little give and take in terms of how accurate it is, because it breathes, it feels more human, you know. That was always interesting, trying to find that right balance.
Yeah, definitely. I know with David, I mean, he's perfectionist and he wants everything to be as clear and just
which made him a good match for us to work with, because he thought the way we thought about getting it just right, you know, before moving on. You know, there's that famous story of him when he produced the track for that song, that Dolly Parton song for Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. There's that story about how they had just a board mix, and he then went in and did this masterful production of it. It was pristine, mixed it and everything, but they had sent this just a board mix to Clive Davis, who was head of, what is it? I can't remember what it was. Head of Atlantic. No, legendary producer and executive producer, signed Aretha Franklin, signed Whitney. He heard the board mix. David Foster then finishes up the mixed version, sends it to him, and Clive rejects it and says, we're going to release the board mix, because it's a more of a gritty human feel about it. And David was livid. David told us this story. He was livid that he was like, all of the imperfections on that thing, man. I didn't get a chance to go in and comp the vocal. I didn't get a chance to do a lot of things that I normally would do to make it as clean as I can. And he said, but in the end, Clive must have known what he was doing, man, because that song went on to break all kind of records in terms of how long it stayed at #1 on the pop charts. And he was like, what do I know? And I love that story. It really goes to the heart of the subjectivity of music making, man. What moves you may not be the thing that moves me, but it moves us both in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, and that story is a reminder of how music works.
Well, I think that's all the questions I had prepared.
Great, man.
Thank you for taking your time.
Absolutely,
out to do this.
man.